Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I do apologise for the cacophony that's coming from outside my office. And I'm on the 8th floor, so you can imagine how loud it is down below. I presented a piece to Oracle actually called Staying Ahead of the Curve on the 17th of February, and I thought I might just share the link with you, so if you care to have a look at that. It plays on, of course, George Soros's famous book called Staying Ahead of the Curve. If you get a chance, have a look at Charles Ireland's Mindspeak session, which was a lot of fun. Home thoughts, it's been a day of high drama, I must admit. I left the house at 6:30 a.m. this morning and normally get here but between 5 to 7 and 7:15, and I got to my desk at 8:55. And it turned out that a lot of commuters were forced on Wednesday morning to walk to town after Matatu operators, those are the folks who operate the PSVs here, blocked Thika Road near Pangani footbridge with stones to protest high levies. And there was a lot of drama, according to the newspaper. Returning to Don DeLillo, you remember I've been reading his books, and I've been going backwards chronologically, and I've come across Point Omega, and I'll give you two quotes from that. Before I fell asleep, eventually, was thinking when I was a small kid, how I tried to imagine the end of the century, and what a far-off wonder that was. And I'd figure out how old I'd be when the century ended, years, months, days, and now look, incredible, we're here. We're 6 years in, and I realize I'm the same skinny kid, my life shadowed by his presence. Won't step on cracks on the sidewalk, not as superstition, but as a test, a discipline, still to do it. And then another paragraph, we're a crowd, a swarm, we think in groups, travel in armies. Armies carry the gene for self-destruction. One bomb is never enough, the blur of technology. This is where the oracles plot their wars, because now comes the introversion. Father Teilhard knew this, the omega point, a leap out of our biology. Ask yourself this question, do we have to be human forever? Consciousness is exhausted, back now to inorganic matter. This is what we want. We want to be stones in a field. Such a luminous and illuminating writer. I'll also put up a photograph I found on Twitter, epic selfie via Trackman. And I like this photograph as well. The thin line of Earth's atmosphere and the setting sun are featured in this photo by a crew member on the International Space Station while the space shuttle Atlantis remains docked with the station. Political reflections, there can be only one assessment of what happened in Kiev, Ukraine, and Ukraine as a whole. This was an anti-constitutional takeover, an armed seizure of power. That's Putin. And on balance, I agree with him, I'm afraid. Julia Loff tweeted a comment by Putin. I have this feeling that in America these people are sitting in a laboratory and doing experiments on Ukraine like on rats. Very powerful visual image, isn't it? And I'll put up a photograph of a meeting with media representatives to answer questions about the situation in Ukraine. A few hours after Putin's comments, Barack Obama dismissed them, saying that the Russian leader seems to have a different set of lawyers, making a different set of interpretations, but I don't think that's fooling anybody. And then I think it's David Remnick in the New Yorker saying that's probably true, but Putin isn't really standing on legalese. He's made his military move rather decisively, and he's waiting to see what, beyond verbal condemnations, the West's response will amount to. In the long run, his grand hopes for Russia are probably doomed. I think that's exhibiting prejudice. For the moment, though, he's holding the initiative. I think he is. And the coup in Kiev was a loss for Russian President Vladimir Putin, but doesn't look like much of a win for the US, Europe, or Ukraine. and saying, what we see in Ukraine today is the messy consequences of a clumsily executed regime change strategy, and I'd agree with that as well. As to where Crimea might go, the possibilities look like autonomy, independence, annexation by Russia. I think the bottom line is that's a red line for Russia. I think the most likely Russian objective is for the government in Kiev to confirm a very high level of autonomy for the Crimean government, give up on trying to have any effective central government, civil or military organs in the province, and abandon, this is key, the idea that it can effect the expulsion of Russia from the Sebastopol base. India calls election as Modi rise threatens Congress rule. 814 million eligible voters, more than double the US population, will pick 543 lawmakers in 9 rounds of voting from April 7 to May the 12th. Polls show Narendra Modi's BJP winning the most seats while falling short of a majority. Modi's rise in the polls has split the nation of 1.2 billion people. Main opponent is Rahul Gandhi, and some other fellow saying we've never had an election before where the two main candidates have such contrasting visions of what direction to take India. Then also, in the middle, there are dozens of regional parties that now hold about 40% of parliamentary seats. BJP forecast to win 217 seats, short of the 272 needed for a majority. I think they're going to get a majority in point of fact. And I think he's a shoo-in, Mr. Modi. I might disagree with him on many points, but just on a pure political analysis, I think his is a winning ticket. The Congress Party looks set for intensive care. China will increase military spending by 12.2% this year to $131.57 billion, the government said on Wednesday. Lots of people think that real outlays are closer to $200 billion. Compared to the US's base budget for fiscal 2014, $526.8 billion. At a time when Washington has stepped up its military presence in the region as part of a strategic pivot toward Asia, China is building new submarines, surface ships, anti-ship ballistic missiles, and has tested emerging technology aimed at destroying missiles in midair. It carried out the first test of a stealth fighter jet in 2011 and has put a refurbished aircraft carrier to sea. Of course, the Chinese are keen on breaking the encirclement, that is, the pivot to Asia. I'll put up the snake again because that represents the pivot and the encirclement of China for me. And I said it before that the pivot to Asia is the encirclement of China, then the shrinking of its operating theatre, and then lighting the tinderbox, that is the periphery. I thought the aim was to light Xinjiang, but clearly, whilst on the way, it's decided to light Kiev as well. You will recall that the architect of Russia's defeat in Afghanistan was Zbigniew Brzezinski, and he remains a foreign policy eminence grise with the presidency here. And I was talking about distant blockade operations and air-sea battle concept. South Sudanese refugees forced to flee to Darfur. I think that headline says it all, doesn't it? Chinese passenger plane passed North Korean rocket trajectory, incredibly. Currency markets 137.30, euro, dollar index 80.18, Japanese yen softened to 102.20, biggest decline since Jan 14, touched 101.20 yesterday. Swiss franc 0.8875, the fix, the Swiss franc is fixed to the euro at 120 has come into sight once again. Aussie 0.8959, Australia GDP expanded 0.8%. in the 3 months ended December, better than people expected. India rupee 61.905, South Korean won 1071.01, Rial 234.10, Egyptian pound 696.25. The rand is at 107775. And I've noticed via Bloomberg that Goldman Sachs are calling for a 25% decline in the rand. The Aussie is plus 0.5% this year. The yen has climbed 3% and is the biggest gainer amongst the dollar's top 10 major counterparts. Euro, little changed. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, 80.18, still trades soft. Euro, dollar, 137.30. Everyone's waiting for the ECB meeting Thursday, and I think therefore will be soft ahead of that. Official figures due today will show that the currency bloc's economy expanded 0.3% in the October to December period. That, I think, will be better than the market expected. Dollar yen 102.20. I, for one, think the yen has an outside chance of getting as high as 95 this year. The ruble rebounded after sliding 2% on Monday. It was up 1.2% yesterday. You'll remember my macro thoughts were by Russia. That was proven correct, I think. Coming to the other commodity markets, gold 1337.10. You'll notice we've been here for a little while. I think we're now running out of steam at these levels, and it's very toppy. Crude oil 103.41. The contract dropped $1.59 yesterday, and it having advanced 5.2% last month alone. I think it's overcooked to the upside. Cold snap in the US, Ukraine events in Ukraine squeezed shorts, but I think that's now set to ebb. Interesting article about how Sotheby's pink diamond buyer defaulted on a record purchase. In a Sotheby's auction in November, a New York diamond cutter defeated 3 bidders to win the most expensive gemstone ever. Yesterday, the auction house said the buyer couldn't pay the 59.6 carat oval cut pink diamond, fetched $83.2 million in a transaction guaranteed by Sotheby's. Was acquired by the auction house after the buyer defaulted. The stone is recorded in Sotheby's inventory at about $72 million. We're currently in discussions with the buyer whilst also considering other alternatives. Coloured stones account for about 0.01% of mined production and are obviously prized for their rarity and command the highest price per carat. Pink is the most desirable colour. The diamond fetched the 3rd highest auction price in 2013 for any artwork or collectible, according to Bloomberg. 2 objects that surpassed it was sold the same week in New York. Francis Bacon's 1969 triptych, 3 studies of Lucian Freud, that went for $142.4 million, and Andy Warhol's silkscreen painting Silver Car Crash Double Disaster, which sold for $105.4 million. So it's interesting. It's called the Pink Star. The thing about it is ultra product like this actually about performed on a consistent basis. Average property prices in Dubai have gained about 40% in the last year, according to Clatton's data, with prices now less than 10% below their peak in August 2008. Dubai stock index has gained 22% this year and is the best performing index in the world. Dubai's booming Farouk Sousa, head of Middle East economics at Citigroup in London, said Dubai today is experiencing a real economic upswing, and its resilience to exogenous shocks is much greater than the lead up to the global financial crisis. Dubai's economic growth last year was the fastest since 2007, when it gained 18%. It may expand 4.7% this year. Put up a photograph of Dubai from the sky that I took 11 days ago. And in hindsight, I think the Middle East is going to continue to see very elevated levels of uncertainty. That gives a flight to safety bid to Dubai, which I expect to continue. Coming to Africa, talks meant to thrash out a deal on political reform after a power struggle between President Salva Kiir and his sacked deputy Riek Machar sparked the unrest, are now due to resume on March 20. East African governments, international community have grown increasingly frustrated by the slow pace of negotiations. You can say that again. Rebel and government negotiators have not met face to face since signing the ceasefire deal, a truce that has failed to stick. The recess will allow the parties to further reflect, IGAD said. And I don't think that's going to bed down anytime soon. Meet the next president of Mozambique, report on Daily Maverick. This is about Felipe Nyusi, basically saying Frelimo is an electoral juggernaut, and now that he's been selected as the Frelimo candidate, he's essentially expected to be the president. Talking about a behind-the-scenes tussle between Guebeza, who was the current president, whom Nyusi is seen as a protege of, and the predecessor Chissano and Gracia Machel. Talk about Renamo, and obviously, Mozambique is a sort of poster child of the Renaissance story, in Africa. South African all share up 3.28% this year. MTN Group, which is Africa's largest wireless operator, said full year profit rose 27%. But remember, the South African rand weakened, so the conversion rate was favourable to them. Total subscribers increased 9.8% to 207.8 million, supported by 9.3 million net additions in Nigeria, its biggest market. And then saying South African business delivered disappointing results. The rest of Africa is obviously doing very well. Dollar versus rand, 10.77105. Remember that Goldman Sachs is looking for a 25% drop. There is a chance that could happen. The rand, however, yesterday gained against all its most traded peers. A bit of a short covering rally. Egyptian pound at 696.25. That's pretty stable. The stock market is up 17.04% in 2014, and it's predicted and predictable that Sisi will run for the presidency. Nigerian all share down 5.14%. News has not been positive this year in Nigeria. The battle between the president and the central bank governor, and I think people are concerned, especially investors that I speak to. Nigeria's military is losing control of swathes of the largely Muslim northeast to radical Islamist insurgents who are killing civilians almost daily. And the run-up to elections next year risks aggravating the violence further. Boko Haram have killed thousands since launched an uprising in 2009 in a bid to carve out an Islamic State in the West African country of 170 million people. More than 150 civilians have died in Boko Haram attacks in the last 4 days, adding to the 300 killed last month, according to Reuters. A security source who asked not to be named said 2,100 people were killed in Boko Haram violence in the last 6 months. And clearly, people sort of ignore this, but it continues to gain strength and traction. And I don't think that the government, I don't know, I can't see the army landing a decisive and final blow. And the trend line seems to be heading entirely in the wrong direction. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 12.8% this year, but bear in mind you've had some erosion because of the weak currency. Northern Uganda emerges from Kony threat to attract oil projects. Northern Uganda's return to peace following a 20-year rebellion by Joseph Kony's Lord's Resistance Army, spurring investment in oil exploration, electricity production and railways. Region where 46% of the population live in poverty has largely been excluded from almost 3 decades of economic expansion. Kony, who has eluded capture on war crime charges, was driven out of the north along with his militia by the Ugandan army in 2005. That allowed thousands of displaced people to return home, and investors including Citadel Capital, Total and Sino Hydro to seek projects. The potential for northern Uganda is huge, and it can play a bigger role in contributing to the national economy, given support through infrastructure development. Region's main city, Gulu, was reconnected in September to a railway that runs to Mombasa port in neighbouring Kenya, after operator Rift Valley Railways, majority owned by Citadel Capital, restored part of the track, which had been left idle for 2 decades. So a bit of promise there, but still a long way to go. Coming to Kenya, interesting report on Bloomberg saying the Kenya president struggles with growth as he faces violence. Uhuru Kenyatta struggling to meet economic growth targets a year after his election victory, as he focuses on fighting charges from the ICC. East Africa's largest economy grew slower than the government expected last year. Kenyatta's election campaign pledged to as much as double annual growth by 2017 probably won't be achieved. Number of Kenyans who are pessimistic about the economic outlook has tripled since before he took office to 60%. This is Ipsos Innovate Kenya. We have not seen real groundwork to support robust growth, and income inequality is still a huge challenge. The ICC has been a huge distraction for him. This has been a big problem. Kenyatta's attention has also been directed to examining security after a 4-day siege in September. That was Westgate. The Kenyan economy grew an estimated 5.1% last year, slower than the government's earlier forecast of as much as 6%. By 2017, the expansion is expected to reach 7%, according to a budget policy statement. Kenyatta pledged to boost annual growth to as much as 10% in his first term, create 1 million jobs a year, provide 1 laptop per child, and ensure the smooth implementation of a new devolved system of government. The President and his deputy have been preoccupied with issues of the ICC, spending lots of money and resources on that, and it has been a real distraction from their work. Currency has been relatively stable. NSE 25 has surged 21% since last year's election day. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment. It's been a bit disappointing, I'm afraid. Lack of focus, a lot of interference, really, I'd agree with this final point. Kenyatta has not had ample time to tour the country and portray himself as the young, energetic leader that Kenyans elected. He has yet to turn populist electoral promises into effective public policy and implementation. Safaricom have issued a cautionary announcement. Directors of Safaricom wish to advise its shareholders and the public that Safaricom has entered into discussions for the acquisition of some of the assets of SR Telecommunications Limited. The proposed transaction may have an effect on the value of the shares of Safaricom. Positive effect, I would have thought. Consolidation, no bad thing. They're taking the backbone infrastructure. Taking the customers. Those customers are very low yielding. Safaricom is up 7.8341% in 2014. I did an interview with Bob after his first half earnings. That link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. Diamond Trust, a link for the extract of the minutes of their EGM. They've agreed an increase of authorized share capital in a rights issue. Diamond Trust is up 21.875% so far this year. Kenya shilling is at 86.346. The Nairobi All shares up 2.72% in 2014. NSE 20 is down 0.41% in 2014. Pan-Africa tanked yesterday, down 18.571% after releasing its full year earnings, about which I spoke yesterday. But bear in mind, it rallied 55.55% through yesterday morning. It's down again today. That's all about, everything being positive, being baited to the price. Buy on the rumor, sell on the fact type thing. Diamond Trust up 20.025%. It reported a 20.025% acceleration in full year profit before tax. That's up over 20% this year. Mumia Sugar, which rallied 35.59% since the 19th of February through yesterday morning, continues to trade lower. And the market on balance, last 2 sessions, has had more losers than winners. But I don't think it's going to be too deep a correction for now. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I am grateful.